Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. And well, we did our panic episode yesterday, so if you haven't seen that, go check that out. But today, we're talking about some players that your league mates might be panicking on, and we think you guys should be going out and buying these players. These are the trade targets to buy before week 2. Dave, we are each going to be talking about 3 players here, so 6 in total. And then at the end of this, we're actually going to talk about some of the players in your league that might have been dropped, players that everyone gave up on a little too soon after week 1. We see this all the time where someone goes out and they're like, let me drop 25% of my fab on Allen Lazard, but I'm also going to drop Rome Odunze to make this happen, right? So we're going to talk about that at the end. But let's hop into the trade targets that we want to buy before week 2. Dave, why don't you kick us off here with Mark Andrews?
This is an easy one for me, man. And I know there's probably some people out there that are panicking and thinking that Isaiah Likely is now the tight end 1 in Baltimore. But if you look at the numbers, Mark Andrews outsnapped Likely 59 to 53, and he ran 38 routes to Isaiah Likely's 35. And I think there's a few ways that we can kind of look at his disappointing performance and put a spin on it. The one that I'll just dispel right away, people have said that like Likely is now the tight end 1. That's just not true. I don't see that happening. A player with a profile like Mark Andrews, a guy who's been dominant at every facet of the game, whether it's commanding targets, making plays after the catch, scoring touchdowns. He's done it all for the last 4 years. He doesn't suddenly just become a tight end 2. That's not how this works. So I'm still willing to bet on the profile here. The other way to look at his disappointing performance is that tightrope procedure. And I think that probably does have a little bit of water to it. We've seen that this can kind of zap some explosiveness from players early in the season after they had that in the offseason. We saw it from Tony Pollard last year, and then he just progressively got better and better as the season went on. So that's possible, too, that you could be buying low on him while he's injured and he can get better. But I think the most likely possibility here to explain this disappointing performance is just that the Ravens, they had a very dink and dunk approach. We know Kansas City and Steve Spagnuolo, they're going to have this really blitz heavy approach. And the best way to beat the blitz is to get the ball out of your quarterback's hands quickly. And that's why Likely drew 11 targets. Justice Hill drew 8 targets. I don't think we're going to see that every single week, but we saw it in week 1 because that's how you counter the Kansas City Chiefs defense. So again, I'm just willing to simply bet on the talent and the profile here with Mark Andrews. He has been a dominant tight end for 4 straight seasons. He's averaging 14.7 points per game since 2021. Travis Kelce is the only guy averaging more points. So he's going to remain on the field. He's going to keep running routes. He's going to get targets. And I'm still looking at him as a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season. If anybody is trying to sell low, I am taking that in a heartbeat.
The way to look at this is that the tight end position sucks so much that the only way that you're getting rid of Mark Andrews is if you think that he is dust, if you think it's just over. And so far, everything that we've seen from that first game is not that Mark Andrews is dust or that he can't move well, but that he was being double covered on a lot of his routes against the Chiefs. And this is something that they've done traditionally. Steve Spagnuolo in games against Mark Andrews, this is what they do. They take him away and they make Lamar Jackson uncomfortable. Hence why we always see the Chiefs beating the Ravens. It's actually kind of crazy. Like we see that when we're watching it on TV, but the Ravens have not accounted for that. I guess they tried this week with so much Isaiah Likely and they just a toenail away from winning that game. But yeah, I'm all in on that Mark Andrews buy low here before week 2.
There's so many things that we see as just like casual fans that just blow my mind. Like the third and long draw play, I'll never understand, or like the little screen on the third and long. Like there's so many things that like I just don't understand. Like I'm not a football savant by any means, but watching the game at home from my couch, it's so easy to just be like, what are you coaches doing sometimes? And yeah, that's one of those instances.
That's what we do. We just second guess, man. Like why would we actually use our brains? We just second guess and tell people they're stupid. We're the meme of what's the little fat kid from King of the Hill just sitting there with the chips on his
Bobby.
belly.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like the end of Dodgeball where it's Ben Stiller with like the belly
Yes.
out and just like snack everywhere. Like that is me every Sunday.
Just playing with your man boobs. That's what's going on. All right, we're going to keep going here. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody, you've got a bunch of ways that you can enjoy this show. First is on YouTube. If you're watching right now, please like this video. Comment down below some players that maybe trades that you are trying to make. Maybe there's some players you disagree with or that you love that we've mentioned here in this video. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel because the episodes here are going to come out before the audio episodes. So you're always going to have a leg up on your league mates there if they also listen to this show. And leave a review on Apple or Spotify. If you are listening on the audio version of this show, audio is fine. Hey, we love our audio people too. But if you're going to do that, once the episode's over, please go and leave a 5-star review for us. All right, Dave. I'm going to go to my first buy low target here before week 2, and it's Chris Olave. I didn't really talk about him a whole lot in the offseason. I mean, a little bit. I still like Chris Olave very much, but this was kind of was not expecting this like really just awful week 1 for him. But so much of that just had to do with how the game just got scripted. The Saints, I mean, we kind of all expected the Panthers to maybe be bad, but not this bad. And the Saints were able to get ahead early and easily. And everything just kind of got weirdly scripted out. We got a touchdown for Foster Moreau, a touchdown for Jawan Johnson, a touchdown for Jamal Williams, a touchdown. Literally everybody got a touchdown
You get a
except
touchdown. You get a touchdown. You get a touchdown, except for Chris Olave.
Yep, not you, Chris Olave, not you, not for Glenn Coco. And at least the peripheral metrics that we like to see with wide receivers, right? Are they out there on the field? What kind of participation are they getting? And targets. The targets weren't quite there, but also a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Saints just had 23 pass attempts, third lowest in week 1 amongst any NFL team. That's just because they got ahead so early. They didn't have to do anything else. But Olave still led the team in snaps, led the team in routes run. Rashid Shaheed led the team with 5 targets. Like that tells you everything you need to know about the passing game that week. Like, it just really wasn't going because it didn't have to. But there's a silver lining here that stood out to me. And Jacob Gibbs over at CBS, he put this out on Twitter. In 2023, the Saints were last in pre-snap motion and play action. And we talked about how that offense was just so boring. A lot of just like send Olave downfield and Derek Carr, just chuck it, and they would miss. Well, in week 1 here, the Saints were first in pre-snap motion, which, Dave, as you pointed out before we started recording, was Rashid Shaheed doing that motion a lot, which honestly, that tells me we could probably be seeing Rashid Shaheed and maybe a
A buy
semi.
low.
I don't know. I don't know about buy low, but maybe the whole Saints offense is a buy low right now because people don't quite believe. But we could, if we're talking about Clint Kubiak coming from San Francisco, we could be seeing Rashid Shaheed in sort of a mini Debo type role where he's going to be motioning across the offensive lot and then being used on end arounds and maybe even being used in the backfield while Chris Olave kind of becomes that Brandon Ayuk player here for the Saints. I almost said the Niners. But there's just a big change in what the Saints are doing on offense. They're also now third in play action instead of being last. So I'm willing to buy in on this Saints offense and what they did. I know that not every week they're going to be playing the Panthers, but if this offense is going to be improving and they are going to be doing something different, which is what we want to see, I want to have the best receiver from this offense and just let's see what we get. I'm fairly certain that the Olave manager in your league is really, really crapping their pants after week 1.
Yeah, it was a scary week 1, and I understand everything that you're saying here. I have a little bit of a different stance, and I don't want to push back too hard. I did write about Chris Olave as somebody trending down in my article that published yesterday. The concerns about Chris Olave have nothing to do with his talent. Like, we know that he is a wildly talented wide receiver, but we've got 2 years of data, and now going into year 3 that just tell us that Chris Olave and Derek Carr, for whatever reason, can't get on the same page. So, like you said, we see Shaheed as kind of that motion guy who's moving around a lot. And I think the worst case scenario here is that Chris Olave, as terrible as it sounds, might just end up kind of being like a field stretching decoy that opens up the underneath of stuff for Kamara and Shaheed and some of these other guys. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but it is in the range of outcomes. I think if you can buy low on Chris Olave, it's worth it. Like, if somebody's
Right.
panicking, looking at the production, looking at the usage, and you can trade the guy that like you drafted in round 4 or 5 and flip him for Chris Olave, I think it's worth it. But he's not a guy that I'm going out and trying to pay his pre-draft prices for, if that makes sense. Like, he was going in the same range as Nico Collins and Cooper Kupp and Jalen Waddle, and I'd prefer those guys outright. But if you can get him for cheap and maybe, flip the guy, like I said, that you drafted in round 4 or 5 for Olave, I think that's worth it.
Where I'll differ on the historical data stuff that you're saying, like that has precedent, is it's only been 1 year of Derek Carr and Chris Olave, not 2.
Oh, you're right.
So,
Yeah, I forgot Carr wasn't there 2
and
years
then
ago. You're
then
right.
this is a new offensive coordinator as well. So like
True.
uh, I might be wrong, and that's fine, and that's the point of a buy low, right? You're only trading for this player if you can buy low. You're not selling the farm for Chris Olave, but if I can buy low on him and be right here, this is the kind of move that wins you your league. Now, if you're wrong and you bought low, hopefully you don't lose your league with it. But if you go out and you're sending one of your top players. I can't think of any of them right now. I don't know why I'm stalling like that. But if you can't get Chris Olave at a good price, yeah, it can be risky. So I'll agree with you on that one.
I forgot about
Uh,
that Andy Dalton Saints year. That feels like a fever
that
dream.
happened.
Yeah, Andy
Andy
Dalton and
Dalton's been
Jameis
on every
Winston,
team.
and I completely forgot about that year.
Is he like the next gen of Ryan Fitzpatrick? Is he just going to keep making that happen everywhere?
I don't know. We might see him start this year. I mean, the way Bryce Young has been playing, I don't know what their long term plans are. I mean, I think Bryce Young, I'm totally getting off track here. He's
Of
probably
course.
insulated to start the season, but I mean, in the one game that we saw Andy Dalton play ahead of Bryce Young last year, he looked like a much better quarterback, and yeah, he still probably has some years in the tank.
Is he insulated? I think if the Panthers are 0-6, Bryce Young is getting benched, and it's over.
Maybe,
It's
maybe.
Joker. All right, let's go to our next player here. Dave, talk about Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, he was behind Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs in fantasy points, and I think a lot of people are going to see that and say, well, Tank Dell is the wide receiver 3 in Houston. He was out targeted by Nico Collins, which was a concern a lot of people had. Stephon Diggs got the looks in the red zone, but he's just in a different role. That's what it is. You know, Nico Collins is a guy who gets deep and he catches his passes deep downfield. Tank Dell does the same, and Stephon Diggs kind of seems to be the guy who's going to be running these underneath routes and getting peppered there. But the thing is, Tank Dell, he still pulled targets. He was still up there. You know, he was second on the team, but on average, his targets came over 16 yards downfield, 10th highest in the league in his average depth of target in week one. So he's still getting that same usage that we saw last year that made him, you know, an elite wide receiver 1 for a little stretch of the season. And I went back and I watched every single play that Tank Dell was targeted on in this game, and he was so close to having a huge boom game. And if you go back and watch the game, you can see that he is in a role that's going to be great for fantasy football. He had one that was a fade in the end zone that he was covered, but you know could have made a play on it, and just he and Stroud didn't get on the same page there. Stroud opted to kind of throw the ball high and just get it out of bounds and not do anything. But the next play, he missed him on a deep route across the middle of the field. Where when I watched the broadcast, I thought that Tank Dell struggled to separate, but when I went back and watched on all 22, saw that Tank Dell was actually wide open. Like he had a step on his defender. He's streaking down the middle of the field towards the end zone, and for some reason, CJ Stroud just roped it to him rather than putting a little air under the ball and letting him get underneath it. And that allowed the defender to make a play on the ball. But he was this close to a huge touchdown catch. And then he had another one where it was a deep route where Tank Dell broke out about 25 yards downfield. He was wide open on an island, and somehow Stroud just underthrew the ball and skipped it into him. So what I'm getting at is like he was a few missed plays away from having a boom game, the same type of boom games that we fell in love with last year in regards to Tank Dell. And I think it's only a matter of time before he and Stroud can start connecting on those deep plays again. So I'm still looking at Tank Dell as kind of a top 20 wide receiver, knowing that he has huge weekly upside. Some people might get worried that he was out targeted by Nico Collins, that he was outscored by Stephon Diggs, but I'm still viewing Tank Dell as a pretty elite wide receiver, and considering you can get him as your wide receiver 3 or your flex or something like that, might be able to buy even lower after week 1. I'm trying to get him in every league that I can.
So this is something that we talked about in the offseason with Stephon Diggs playing a lot in the slot and how it was worrisome because last year his targets were not as far downfield as they've been in the past. We ended up with the same thing again here in week 1. I'll read this out to you. Nico Collins and Tank Dell combined for 95% of the Texans passing attack air yards in week 1, while Stephon Diggs averaged 1.6 air yards per target on 6 targets, 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. If there was ever a sell high in fantasy football right now, it's Stephon Diggs. I would actually do a 1-for-1 swap of Stephon Diggs for Tank Dell
Easily.
immediately if someone wants to do that. This was Stephon Diggs' fewest air yards per target in any game since 2016. The writing is on the wall for us there. And like you and I always talk about this, how touchdowns are hard to keep going. Getting 2 in week 1, like that is the easiest sell high right now. There are a lot of fantasy managers saying Stephon Diggs is back
Yeah.
right now. 1.6 yards per route run or air yards share, excuse me, is not like that. That's not telling me that he's back. 6 targets, not telling me that he's back. 2 touchdowns looks nice on paper, but I'd be willing to sell. And I love the Tank Dell call here, Dave. All right, I'm going to go to my next guy here, and we got something for diminutive, wee little lads that play wide receiver here. I'm gonna go with Zay Flowers, wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens.
All right.
And
I mean, the NFL's changed. These little guys, man, they can get it done in passing attacks now. You used to need to be a big-bodied, strong receiver, and now with the way that offenses or defenses are getting spread out, take down Zay Flowers. They've got a role in the NFL.
Short Kings, this is your time. Depending on what state I'm in, I'm with you. I'm with you. Down here in South Florida, dude, I'm relatively tall. I went to a wedding 2 weeks ago in Brazil, and I was the tallest groomsman, and they set me up with a bridesmaid who was a legit 6 footer, and I was it wasn't good looking. It was not cute. It was not cute. Short Kings, rise up. Zay Flowers is the guy that I want to buy here, man. And the Chiefs defense that they went up against in week one, the secondary is very underrated. The Chiefs defense overall is very, very good. But what stood out to me here is Zay Flowers had 9 targets, 26% target share. He actually had 4 targets get called back due to penalties. Like, we don't typically see that all that often, where entire passing plays and targets for a single player get called back so many times in a row. But that would have been 13 targets in the game with a 33% target share. I know we already talked about like how Mark Andrews was sort of schemed out, and maybe we don't continue to see 13 targets per game for Zay Flowers, but it is very realistic that we continue to see something like 7 to 8 targets per game for Zay Flowers, and the Isaiah Likely targets come down and get transferred over to Mark Andrews. Like, there's a lot that we could see very different here, but the one thing that's for certain is that Zay Flowers is the wide receiver one on this team. I want a good wide receiver that's getting targets on a good offense. I think it's that simple. Zay Flowers would have been second in the NFL in targets last week had he gotten those 13 targets. We already know he's a big play machine. I think the thing that a lot of people are going to remember and look at, which obviously we have to have the context, is a lot of his targets were close to the line of scrimmage. Can't say one good thing about Stephon Diggs and then not say that about Zay Flowers here. He did get a lot of those screen plays and short passing plays, but that's more set up for Zay Flowers to make the big play after the catch, which we know he is good at. It just did not work out in week one. And we're also like one bad passing play away from Zay Flowers having a touchdown and being one of the higher scoring wide receivers in week one. It was like a play for those who missed it. It was one of those plays where Lamar is rolling out of the pocket. Zay Flowers is running across the end zone, and there's a wide open zone, a soft zone for him to sit in. Zay Flowers should have stopped and sat in that zone. And then Lamar expected him to do that. Zay didn't. He probably went about 3 steps too far, and Lamar threw it way
Good call
behind.
on that, because I see a lot of people saying that, like, Lamar missed that throw, but I think you're right. Like, that was,
No.
Zay Flowers should have stopped and turned
Yes.
and caught the ball. He was streaking behind a defender, so good call. I'm glad that you noticed that as well, because the narrative after that game was, "How does Lamar miss all these easy throws?" I think Lamar made the right decision, and Zay Flowers was just on the wrong page.
Yeah, I don't know that he still would have hit him anyways. Like, it just seemed like there was poor communication. But yeah, wide receivers got to stop and sit in that soft zone there. But it's just communication stuff, and I do expect this offense to continue to get better for Zay Flowers if he keeps getting this utilization. I love that going forward.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Zay Flowers. We talked about it a lot this offseason. What we saw in college, like when he was at Boston College, right? Did I get that right? I think that's
Yes,
where he went.
BC,
Yes.
Boston College.
And he was very much so just like a deep ball specialist there. Like almost all of his targets were coming 30, 40 yards downfield. And then we see in the NFL, they use him in this weird kind of gimmicky role to start the season last year, his rookie season, where it was all just being fed touches at the line of scrimmage and allowing him to do things after the catch, which was so different than what we saw early or in his college career. And then late in the season, we saw him start to blossom into a more versatile wide receiver, running deeper routes downfield. And then what we saw in week one is that they kind of put both together, like his early rookie season and his late rookie season. They were asking him to do everything. And when he can do that, when he can be the guy who's catching screen passes and he could also be the guy streaking 50 yards downfield, it just makes it so tough to cover him because you never know what route he's going to be running. And he can do all of them pretty successfully. So I think Zay Flowers is easily going to lead this team in targets. He is by far their best weapon in the passing game. I'm still steadfast in Mark Andrews, and he plays the tight end position, so 12, 13, 14 points per week is going to be fine for him. But Zay Flowers has that like 20 point per game ceiling. Like, you watch him with the ball in his hands, he's one of the most exciting players in the NFL. Like, he is just a jitterbug. Like, his jump cuts, like he is just popping 10 yards off to the side and avoiding defenders. So the things that he can do with the ball in his hand really give him a sky high ceiling. So I'm with you as well, trying to buy Zay Flowers where I can.
Yeah, I think the theme that we've had here and will continue to have throughout this is good players with volume on good or potentially good offenses. And that's That's why there's a little bit of this buy low window here, just underperforming in week one, or maybe something that's just going under the radar. And that's what I think ends up happening with Zay Flowers here. Let's go to the next guy that you have here, Dave. And this is not a name that I expected to see ever on a buy low list of any kind because he's just so consistent. He is so good. But yeah, we got a weird week one for Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, and this is going to be a tough one to pull off because I don't know if people are like totally panicking yet, but I don't know. There might be a narrative out there that like Jameson Williams is the wide receiver one now in Detroit. Like he was the target leader, he was the one making the explosive plays. Meanwhile, Amon-Ra St. Brown, man, like there's no way to sugarcoat it. He looked terrible, and it's not just me. You know, I went to PFF grades, and Amon-Ra St. Brown was ranked as the one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, ninth worst receiver out of 121 qualifying wide receivers in week one. He was graded as the ninth worst. It was a terrible game. There were drops, there were concentration issues, there were slips, there were plays where it looked like he should have run an option route and was on the wrong page with Jared Goff. And I got to be honest, you know, I don't want to say I'm panicking, but I'm a little bit concerned here. Like there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. We know Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery are going to stay plenty involved. We know Sam Laporte is going to get his, and now we've got Jameson Williams in the mix as well. But I'm still just betting on the talent here. I mean, this is a guy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who basically gives you a 20-point floor every single week. And I think because this was an island game and those get so heavily scrutinized when everybody's watching those primetime games, everybody saw the Jameson Williams breakout, everybody saw the poor game from Amon-Ra St. Brown, there might be an opportunity here. Now, again, I said this was a bad game. It was the fewest points Amon-Ra St. Brown has ever scored in a matchup where he's played 65+% of the snap shares. And he was on the field for 98% of the snaps. I mean, he was a full-time player, ran a ton of routes, got the targets, and just didn't do much with it. But I think if you can flip him for or flip, you know, one of your late first round picks. You know, if you took Garrett Wilson or Bijan Robinson or somebody like that, and you're able to turn that into Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think we have enough historical data on Amon-Ra to know that he is a great player who's going to draw targets and make plays and score touchdowns and all those things. Where, you know, Garrett Wilson, still a good player, but we see a weird preference for Allen Lazard in New York and Bijan Robinson. You know, I have some concerns about the Falcons offense. So I'm still kind of sticking with my pre-draft grade here where I had Amon-Ra St. Brown as my fourth player off the board. And if I can take any player that I drafted later in round one and turn that into Amon-Ra, I'm happily doing so.
Dude, this is one of those moments where I wish we could drop expletives. Because if you're trading Amon-Ra St. Brown after week one, what the bleep are you doing? Honestly, like we cannot
Yeah, I
panic
hear a lot of
after
people
one
saying
week.
like you don't want to catch a falling knife, and they're going to say like, well, you know, he might just be the second option in Detroit now. You know, there's a
One,
lot of
I have
people that have
never heard anyone say don't catch a falling knife. Like that just seems like it's just common knowledge. Don't catch knives.
right, but, you know, I think there might be some people out there with the mindset that, you know, it's only gonna get worse for Amon-Ra, and people have been trying to find reasons to knock Amon-Ra St. Brown since he came into the league. You know, 4th round pick, didn't do much the first half of his rookie season. A lot of people said that he was schemed up, gimmicky touches, and that he's not gonna be able to sustain this. Granted, those probably aren't the same people who spent a 1st round pick on Amon-Ra St. Brown in drafts this year, but if somebody, you know, caught a sliding Amon-Ra in drafts and they might not have the firmest belief in his talent, there might be an opportunity to buy low here.
Honestly, F that. I'm not even buying low. I'm buying high. I'm going to be
Yeah.
aggressive. I'm
Yeah.
going to go and give whatever that Amon-Ra St. Brown manager wants for what I mean. This is a first round pick. This was a guy who we were talking about as top 4, top 5 pick. And if someone's willing to move on from him after 1 week, you don't deserve him, sir or madam. Like the Amon-Ra's too good for you. Like that's it. You know what? Do this. Do this, guys. Send an email, abrown@footballguys.com, your worst trades you've ever made. Because if someone is trading away Amon-Ra St. Brown after week one, you have to hit on whoever you're getting back in return at such an incredible return that if not, it's a terrible trade. It's a terrible trade. So I like this, Dave, and I'm willing to say it's not even just a buy low, it's a buy high. Go and get Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah. I'm
Absolutely.
trying to look at some redraft leagues to see where I might be able to buy low on him. And the problem is I just already have him on drafted
Yeah.
everywhere. He's already on my team, and you're not buying him low from me.
Yeah, I'm checking that in all my leagues after we finish recording here. I'm gonna go and send some aggressive trade offers. All right. Last guy I want to talk about here, who is a buy low for me, and we're getting to that point where it's the definition of insanity, where it's just like if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you might be the problem. And I'm once again telling the people to buy low on Drake London, but there's a caveat here. Make sure it is low. Do not buy into where he was getting drafted. You are buying into the panic of he hasn't done it. Week 1 happened. He still didn't do it. This is the kind of guy that you want to buy low on, and when it works, it changes your season because you can get him probably really low if that manager is that panicked. There was a tough matchup in week 1 against the Steelers. That Steelers defense is going to be really, really good. Going up against Joey Porter Jr., who's now become one of the top corners in the league, that's concerning for Drake London. And the Steelers actually really struggled against the slot wide receivers. That was last year, and then here in week 1 again, where Ray McLeod leads the Falcons in receiving, and he ends up with, I believe, 6 targets, Dave. So yeah, whenever Ray McLeod is leading your team in targets and receptions and yardage, maybe your offense didn't quite go to plan. And I think what we can do is we can scrap this week 1 here. Drake London only had 3 targets, but the good news is 100% route participation rate. This is not what we had with Arthur Smith. And I think that was the big concern then is, are these players actually getting used out on the field? We are seeing usage for Drake London, for Kyle Pitts, for Bijan Robinson. Now it's just a matter of time. It's, can the team course correct? And if the Falcons and Kirk Cousins can course correct, especially after a loss, teams do that big time. They course correct to their stars in a big way. We should see a very different game script in week 2 going up against the Eagles. Their secondary has been bad in Philly for years now. I get it. There are going to be concerns, and rightfully so. There should be concerns about Drake London. I'm not saying this is a slam dunk by any means, but if you can get him for a very low cost, this is probably, I think, the cheapest guy in this group. Really, maybe Tank Dell might be a little bit cheaper, but I think that Drake London might end up being one of the cheapest guys you can get here because I think most people are just fed up with him at this point. But and I got this from JJ Zacharyson, and if we can look ahead, if you make the fantasy playoffs, Drake London's matchups are the Raiders, the Giants, and Commanders. 3 very easy secondaries to beat. If Kirk Cousins, who by the way just looked like an old guy coming off of an Achilles, like duh, if he gets better, or if Michael Penix has to go in and the Falcons offense just simply gets Drake London his targets like they should, this is a player who's much more valuable than he was in week 1.
Yeah, I agree there. I'm kind of looking through right now and seeing some names that I might be interested in trading Drake London for. I don't know if
Let's hear him.
they'd pull the trigger on this, but like Rashi Rice, oh my goodness, if you're able to flip, if you can do that, I'd take it. But I'm trying
You're
to like
saying
who.
trade Drake London for Rushy
Yeah,
Rice.
I would do that, but I'm
Okay.
trying to see like
Yeah.
I'm looking down like the guys who are getting drafted below Drake London and trying to think like who I would trade for Drake London and like Malik Neighbors. I think that's kind of an intriguing name. Like if I drafted Malik Neighbors, who was getting drafted around below Drake London in most platforms, I'd probably make that switch. Stephon Diggs is another guy we talked about, was getting
Oh,
drafted.
there you go. If I can trade
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs for Drake London, I'm doing that ASAP.
Yeah. I think Malik Neighbors, Stephon Diggs, um, Christian Kirk. I mean, that would be a great one if you're able to pull that off. I don't know how far you can really get down the draft board before people start saying no. I think my take on Drake London is going to be very similar to my Drake on Chris Olave, and that's because I had similar preseason takes on both of these guys. If you're able to buy super low on them, I think it's worth it, but I also wouldn't blame anybody if they're able to sell at their pre-draft cost. And that we could say that about all these players. All of these players that we've talked about today, all 6 guys are people who essentially disappointed in their rookie season, and it's just you have to kind of make the decision. Is this just a blip in what's otherwise going to
In
be
week
a
1.
good season, or is this a trend to take notice of? And a lot of people are just going to anchor onto their preseason takes to decide whether they think this was a blip or a trend.
I think you said rookie season. I just want to confirm. You mean like they disappointed in week 1?
Week one,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
By the way, Jaden Reed, I'd trade him immediately for Drake London.
Really?
Jameson, yeah, yeah. We're gonna get 2 weeks here probably of Malik Willis. Um,
True, yeah, yeah.
like I'm willing to make that trade ASAP. I love Jameson Williams, but I'm willing to trade Jameson Williams for Drake London. All these guys that overperformed in week one, yeah, let's do that. Chris Godwin for Drake London, I'm willing to do that. Yeah, I know, Dave, you disagree. I know, and that's fine. It'll be a little
I'm just not
spicy.
I'm not the biggest fan of London, and that's why I'm just kinda biting my
I
tongue
know,
here a little bit.
I
Sometimes we
know.
don't like the same players, but that's why trades happen because, like, trades that you'd be willing to make, I wouldn't, and vice versa. So, like, this is exactly what you do is you find the me in your league, and you find the Alfredo in your league. You find the guys who have different opinions on player values, and that's how you get trades done.
It's just you look at the players, the how I mean, and granted, some people do it way too obvious. By the way, don't be that guy that's like, "Hey, I got this lovely J.K. Dobbins here for your Bijan Robinson." Like, did you know he finished higher than him? And we like, don't do that. Don't be that
Uh,
guy in your league. Uh, but yeah, it's sometimes you're just looking and you're saying, okay, is Jaden Reed going to finish as a top 12 wide receiver? Is he going to finish as a top 15 wide receiver? Likely not. Right now, this is probably the highest he's going to be at wide receiver one in
I will say
fantasy.
since we're off on a tangent, I
Yeah,
will say
tangent.
Jaden Reed is the biggest mover in my rankings heading into week 2. I was low on him in my pre-draft rankings, but I saw enough in week 1 that I'm willing to just eat my crow immediately. A lot of times I want to say like, "Hey, let's wait, a month into the season, 5, 6 weeks into the season before we really start making any dramatic swings." But my thesis behind fading Jaden Reed was that he's a slot only player. And last year they only ran 3 wide receiver sets and about 45% of their snaps. But this year, they just completely changed up how they operate the offense. And now they play out of 11 personnel almost primarily. So Jaden Reed is always on the field. So he still is only a slot player. Like he's not going to be on the field for 2 wide receiver sets. But now the Packers run so many 3 wide receiver sets that it doesn't matter. So I'm willing to eat my take on Jaden Reed, even if the next couple of weeks could be a little bit slow with Malik Willis there. Jaden Reed he's a good player and he's on the field a lot more than he was last year.
Yeah, and he is a good player. I'm not saying he's not a good player. I love Jaden Reed. I was higher on him than most people when he was coming out as a rookie. Um, it's just the value that he's at right now. Like to me,
Yeah.
he's not a top 15 wide receiver. And if I can trade him for a guy who I
Oh, yeah.
had ranked
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
top 15 wide receiver before season, like I'll do that right now. So we talked about well, we talked about a lot in this episode, but we've talked about like
Yeah.
bad
6
trades that
high
have been
lows, but really we talked about like 40 different players somehow.
yeah.
It's, pretty on brand. This time of year, man, there's just, like, so much, and I remember making this joke last year during the off season, like or during the season. Like, during the off season, that's when we can go back and, like, really dive deep into every single game and really pour through the data, but, like, in season, it's so hard. Like, it's already Wednesday. Like, we have more football games tomorrow. I feel like I've barely finished digesting what we saw in week 1, and we already have to turn the page and start looking at week 2. Like, it is just nonstop. So that's why these shows, like, we're gonna shoot off on different tangents and talk about different players all the time because there's just so much information that we want to share. And it feels like even though we're doing daily shows, it isn't close to enough time.
Yeah, I've got sort of a like NFL red zone in my head throughout the week during the
Yeah.
fantasy football season where it's just like, okay, what show do we have today? What game's coming up tonight? And it's just like it's just nonstop,
Yeah.
nonstop.
Last night, I like kicked my feet up on the couch and I was like, I get to unplug early today. And then I was like, wait, no, we have a show that I need to prep for tomorrow
False.
morning. And then I start doing that. And then I'm like, all right, finally, relaxation time. And then I'm like, no, I've got waivers on 30 leagues. And it's just, it doesn't stop, man. But
Nope.
17 straight weeks of this. And it's a good time. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
The grind doesn't stop. We're like the Bitcoin bros. It's like I've been up since 4 a.m. I fit 3 days into 24 hours. That's us.
Yeah. Diamond
We're
hands on Amon-Ra St.Brown. You're not getting him from me.
We're so cool. God, we're cool. All right. You know what happens though is like there's all of this distraction of who you should buy, who you should start, who you're getting off waivers that sometimes we just don't pay attention to who actually gets dropped in our fantasy leagues. And that's when you can actually pounce on a player that's going to give you a lot of value down the line. Um, this year we saw some big names here, Dave. I'm going to read some of these off to you, and I think there's a couple names on here that we can go over, but I'm going to read these names. These are the most dropped players on Sleeper. That a lot of them, for example, this first one, Blake Corum, went from 99% roster down to 75%. And if we don't get a big breakout in week 2, I'm going to venture to say that 75% is going to drop down to like 60 or 55 and just keep moving down the bench. But there's Blake Corum.
Exercise patience with rookies. We talked about this all offseason. You don't draft rookies to be guys that you can plug in your lineup and expect production from week 1. You draft these guys knowing that it's going to take them some time. Like if you drafted Blake Corum and dropped him after week 1, you didn't understand the reasoning behind drafting Blake Corum. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, this was not a guy that we said is going to come out and be a star in week 1. And that's like the thing, we talked about this in the waiver show and in the panic show is we don't rank and we don't draft for week 1. If that was the case, Dave and I would have been saying all offseason, this guy's going to be really good for the first 3 weeks of the season and then crap the bed for the rest of the season. No, we're always talking about what's going to happen in the full scale of the season and what's going to happen
Mm.
when we get closer to the fantasy playoffs. And that's what that's what you draft for. That's what you're picking guys up off waivers for. So let's go through this list here. Got Blake Corum, Jalen Polk, Andre, yep, Cole Kmet, Darnell Mooney, Khalil Herbert, Dalvin Cook. That one was funny. Rico Dowdle,
Don't pick up
Deshaun
Dalvin.
Watson. Yeah, don't pick up Dalvin Cook. Don't pick up
That was
Deshaun
the right.
Watson.
That was the right one. Yeah.
Yeah, don't pick up that one either. Caleb Williams, Romeo Dobbs, and Trey Benson. And Dave, there's a few players on here. Like I think Romeo Dobbs is absolutely worth a pickup if someone dropped him. Trey Benson, absolutely worth a pickup if someone dropped him. Khalil Herbert, I think as well. Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet. We got to see what
Why is
happens
Khalil
with.
Herbert being dropped? That's what I don't understand. Like
Like, what did you think was going to happen in week 1?
DeAndre Swift was terrible. Like, if you watch this
Don't
game, DeAndre Swift was so bad. Like, Khalil Herbert should not be getting dropped. Like, he didn't get a whole ton of touches, but it was just a bad week for the Bears offense, and DeAndre Swift looked awful. If anything, like, I'd say that Khalil Herbert should be trending up after week 1, not being dropped.
And you know what happens is with a lot of these players, it's not that necessarily they were bad or they didn't have the performance. I mean, in most cases, it was here for these names, but it's that someone will see, and I keep using this, and I'm sorry to him and his family, but they'll see Alan Lazard with 2 touchdowns and be like, oh my God, I have to drop Blake Corum for Alan Lazard. And I cannot stress this enough. Do not do that. Please do not drop these players that have massive upside later in the season, these rookies that we tell you to hold on to for Alan Lazard or a guy like that who goes out and has a massive 2 touchdown game when that's not the norm for them, especially throughout
Somebody
their career.
somebody in my home league this morning dropped $14 on Alan Lazard and dropped Marshawn Lloyd to pick him up. Just like, no, that's not
Alan
what you
Lazard was the number 1 added player in waivers on the Sleeper app, and
do.
I
Yeah.
saw a lot of very high bids for him. We make this mistake every year, people. We
And the
see it
funny
in
thing,
like
like,
the Royal Week
if he didn't catch that garbage time touchdown from
from
the
Tyrod.
backup quarterback at the end of the
Yeah.
game, nobody would be thinking twice about Alan Lazard. You know, it was
Nope.
just he had one nice catch down the sidelines. He had a touchdown on a broken play, and if that was all he did, like nobody would be picking up Alan Lazard. But because he caught a garbage time touchdown from Tyrod Taylor, now he's everybody's number 1 ad going into the week. Don't get me wrong, like I am an Alan Lazard fan. I can go bust my autographed Alan Lazard jersey out of the
Plus,
closet right now. You know, big fan of Alan Lazard. Like I think he's a good football player, but he should not be the primary target on your waiver wire this week because he's not going to catch 2 touchdowns every single week. And the reality is he's going to have a lot of games where it's 3 catches for 31 scoreless yards, and that doesn't help at all in fantasy.
we got the full Alan Lazard experience, by the way, in week 1, where he drops
Yeah.
a pass early, that catches a long touchdown from Rodgers, and then the Jets offense just looked like duty. Let's do this. Dave,
Yeah.
let's pick 2 names from this list here that we want to talk about that we see that have some good value going forward.
Blake Corum is the one for me. Like it's
Yep.
crazy to me that he's being dropped. And I know Ronnie Rivers was involved week 1, and that's why probably people probably just say, well, Kyron Williams with his what did he have, like a 96% snap share? I want to say something crazy. People are going to see that. They're going to see that Ronnie Rivers was the number 2 and just assume that Blake Corum is this year's Zach Evans. But it's a completely different apples to oranges. Zach Evans was a 6th round pick, I believe, maybe even a 7th round pick. Blake Corum was a 2nd round pick. Blake Corum is a guy who got the majority of his reps in the offseason with the ones, a guy that they have been raving about. Sean McVay already came out after the game and said that wasn't our intention, was to give the ball to
Yes.
Kyron Williams that much. We need to make sure going forward that we're getting these other guys involved. So I think that we see Blake Corum get some snaps in week 2, and it might not be, you know, this huge opportunity share that we were hoping for. But I think that the contingent upside is still there. And all it takes, man, like one good hard run from Blake Corum, and he's going to be everybody's number 1 waiver wire pickup. So rather than waiting for that to happen and then getting a bidding war with all of your other league mates, check to see if he was dropped now. See if you can pick him up for free today on Wednesday morning, knowing that you are an injury away from having a potential top 5 back.
I'm getting kind of fed up with people that I keep seeing this, whether it's in comments or on Twitter, saying Sean McVay doesn't use rookie running backs. And it's because, guys, he's never had to. Also, Blake Corum is the highest drafted running back that he's had since he's been a head coach there in Los Angeles. Excuse me, the highest drafted running back that he has
Yes.
made. Obviously,
Yes.
Todd Gurley was a first round pick, but
Jeff
uh,
Fisher made that one though, I think, right?
dude,
Was it Jeff Fisher who was
I
the head
have
coach then?
blocked that name
Yeah.
out of my head so hard. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Jeff
Yeah.
Fisher was the head coach that year, and then McVay came in the year after, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, the moral of the story here is you don't drop a player with league winning upside after week
Right.
one. After
Right.
week one. Like, don't listen. If we go 3 weeks into the season and he has not played a single game, then I'm starting to think about it.
Right.
But we're not doing this whole thing where we tote Jonathan Brooks all offseason as a guy who he can start on the pup, and we talk about how Alvin Kamara missed 3 games last year and how good these players can be for the rest of the season and win you your leagues, and then just about face the second the play starts. That's not it.
Yeah. I mean, if
Uh,
Raheem Mostert wasn't banged up right now, Jalen Wright would be getting dropped on every league too. It's just the way like people draft rookies and then get so impatient after 1 week.
Dave, the other name I want to talk about here, Rico Dowdle. Um, Listen, Zeke was the 1A in this offense. He got himself the touchdown. He was out there more on passing downs. However, the opportunities are not that far apart between Zeke and Rico Dowdle. Looking at Zeke, 12 opportunities in this game, Rico Dowdle, 9. It is a truly 1A, 1B situation. We talk about the upside of a guy like Blake Corum or any of these other backup running backs, but Rico Dowdle is actually out there on the field. And Dowdle might have injury concerns or even you know what? I haven't seen enough film on Dowdle. Like I've watched it, but it's just not enough. Like we've seen like 30 snaps from the guy. And it's not enough for us to see. I really want to watch the film of this Cowboys game in week 1 and see how everything looked along the offensive line, because everything that I've read so far was that the offensive line did not look good. But I think Rico Dowdle is still worth holding on to in leagues and likely worth a waiver wire ad if someone dropped him.
Yeah. I mean, Dowdle was the other guy that I was going to talk about as well as worth picking up. And I'm not a huge fan of Rico Dowdle, but I think it's way too early to cut the cord on him. I think Zeke is the RB1. We talked about that going into halftime when it was still a close game. He was out touching Dowdle 10-2, and then Dowdle got some run late in the game when it was already out of hand. But still, I mean, again, all of these RB2s on good offenses. Same thing about Blake Corum. He's an injury away from having a
Oh,
big
good
workload
God.
on a good offense, and that's it. You just don't want to drop these guys that are injury away running backs. That it completely goes against the reasoning of rostering these guys. Like there's no reason to drop these guys that are handcuffs.
I'm doing a complete about face right now. Oh my God. I just looked at the Cowboys schedule coming up, and every team is good at stopping the run. This is going to be ugly. I'm doing a complete about face right here live on the show. They've got
Doing
the
a
Saints,
great
the
job of
Ravens.
pre-show prep here. Really good
Oh
job.
my God. Saints, Ravens. Okay, Giants, that's very beatable. But then they got the Steelers, the Lions, a bye week. Come out of the bye week. They've got the Niners, the Falcons, the Eagles, the Texans offense. And they finally catch a break when we get into week 12, where they go Commanders, Giants, Bengals, Panthers. But then they get to the fantasy playoffs, the most important weeks, weeks 16 and 17 of the year. And it's going to be the Bucks and Eagles, two very good. I don't want a Cowboys running back. Just cut them all. Cut them all, trade Zeke right now. Do it. Don't panic, but do that, I guess. I'm
Yeah.
such a fraud. Thank God I did this 40 plus minutes into the episode. Because if
you
you're
know, it,
watching this, you already knew I was a fraud. That's fine.
Tough schedule for sure. And the efficiency might not be there for the running backs, but the Cowboys are a good enough team that they're going to hang in these games, and they're not going to just be, trailing 3 scores and abandoning the run. So I think there's still some juice to squeeze out of this backfield.
It's going to be whoever's catching passes, I think. And
Yeah.
if it remains Zeke that's catching passes, then God bless you for starting Zeke in your lineup. If Dowdle ends up being that guy, cool. Yeah, all right. There's enough there that makes me say don't drop him, but I'm so much less enthusiastic than I was at any point about Cowboys running back. God, that schedule's awful. All right, Dave. Well, we did it. We went through 6
We did.
players to buy low before week 2 here. Then we talked about some of the most dropped players on Sleeper. We're going to be back again tomorrow, giving you our starts, sits, and streamers for week 2. Please make sure you're subscribed to this channel and that you are subscribed to the Football Guys Daily News Update. We're going to get everything you need, all of the weekly news, the injury updates, everything you need for every week of fantasy football sent directly to your email inbox from Joe Bryant himself. For myself, For Dave Kluge, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.